The thunder cracked across the darkening Wyoming sky as Daisy Newcomb urged her exhausted mare forward, desperation mounting with each passing minute. The year was 1878, and the 23-year-old found herself in the unforgiving wilderness of the western frontier, miles from the nearest town with night falling and a storm brewing that promised no mercy. "Just a little farther, Penny," she whispered to her trembling horse, patting the animal's neck as the first fat raindrops began to fall. The wind picked up, whipping Daisy's auburn hair from beneath her sodden bonnet. She had been traveling to Silver City, where a position as a schoolteacher awaited her, but the sudden spring storm had driven her off course. Now, as lightning split the sky, Daisy knew her situation had become dire. Through the sheets of rain, she spotted a flicker of yellow light in the distance. Hope surged through her veins as she guided Penny toward what appeared to be a small homestead nestled against the base of a rocky hill. As they drew closer, Daisy could make out the shape of a modest cabin with smoke curling from its chimney, disappearing quickly into the tempestuous sky. She dismounted stiffly at the hitching post, her traveling dress heavy with rainwater. The journey from Ohio had been long and grueling, but nothing had prepared her for the ferocity of Wyoming's weather. Gathering her courage, she approached the door and knocked firmly, praying whoever was inside would have enough kindness to offer shelter to a stranger. The door swung open, revealing a tall man with broad shoulders and a weather-worn face. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, widened at the sight of her bedraggled appearance. He leaned heavily on a wooden cane, his left leg clearly unable to bear his full weight. "Madam," he questioned, voice rough but not unkind, "you look half drowned." "I apologize for the intrusion," Daisy said, struggling to keep her teeth from chattering. "My name is Daisy Newcomb. I was traveling to Silver City when the storm caught me. I was hoping, perhaps, you might have a place where I could weather the storm, just until morning." The man studied her for a long moment before nodding curtly. He stepped back, favoring his right leg as he moved. "Name's Hank Ingram," he said. "Come in before you catch your death." Relief flooded through Daisy as she stepped into the warmth of the cabin. It was a simple space but tidy, with a stone fireplace casting a golden glow across the wooden floors and sparse furnishings. A pot bubbled over the fire, filling the air with the savory scent of rabbit stew. "Thank you, Mr. Ingram," she said, removing her soaked bonnet. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't answered your door." "Just Hank," he replied, limping toward a small cupboard from which he retrieved a blanket. "Not much for formalities out here." He handed her the blanket with a gruff gesture. "Your horse can go in the lean-to stable. I'll tend to it once you're settled." "I couldn't ask you to, you didn't ask." His voice was firm but not harsh. "Storm's getting worse. Stay put, get warm." As he stepped back outside to care for Penny, Daisy took the opportunity to observe her surroundings more carefully. The cabin was sparsely decorated, yet everything had its place. A bookshelf stood against one wall, filled with worn volumes. A guitar rested in one corner. Above the fireplace hung a Winchester rifle, and beside it, a framed tintype photograph of a younger Hank in a Union Army uniform, standing straight and tall with no sign of his current disability. When Hank returned several minutes later, he was drenched to the skin, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. He moved with careful precision, each step measured as though walking on ground that might give way. Daisy noticed him wince as he lowered himself into a chair by the fire. "Your leg," she said before she could stop herself. "Is it paining you badly?" His expression hardened. "It's nothing." "I don't mean to pry," she continued, drawing the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "It's just that I have some experience with tending wounds. My father was a doctor in Ohio before he passed." Hank's gaze remained fixed on the fire. "Army surgeon already did what could be done. Bullet took a chunk of bone near my knee during Gettysburg. 15 years, and it still lets me know when a storm's coming." He looked up at her suddenly. "You said Silver City. What business does a lady like you have there?" "I'm to be the new schoolteacher," Daisy replied. The town council wrote that children are in need of proper education, and she hesitated, not wanting to reveal too much of herself to this stranger. I needed a fresh start. Hank nodded, as if understanding what remained unsaid. Silver City's about 20 miles southwest of here. Storm like this, trails will be washed out for days. You're welcome to stay until it's safe to travel. Daisy's eyes widened. I couldn't impose, it's not imposing if I'm offering, he interrupted, rising with effort. He moved to the pot on the fire and stirred it. Besides, I don't make a habit of sending folks out to die in Wyoming storms. Hope you like rabbit stew. As Hank ladled the steaming stew into 2 wooden bowls, Daisy felt a curious mixture of gratitude and unease. She had been raised to be wary of strangers, particularly men living alone on the frontier. Yet there was something in Hank Ingram's direct manner that inspired trust despite his gruff exterior. "Thank you," she said simply, as he handed her a bowl and spoon. They ate in companionable silence, the howling of the wind and the drumming of rain on the roof filling the void where conversation might have been. Daisy couldn't help but notice how Hank occasionally rubbed at his left leg, his face tightening imperceptibly with pain. "Mr. Ingram, Hank," she ventured after finishing her meal, "would you allow me to look at your leg? The damp weather often aggravates old wounds, and I might be able to help ease your discomfort." His head snapped up, suspicion flaring in his eyes. "I told you, nothing to be done." "Perhaps," she conceded, "but my father taught me a few treatments that can help with pain. A poultice, at least, might bring some relief." Hank stared at her for a long moment, the fire crackling between them. Finally, his shoulders dropped slightly. "Don't see how it could make it worse," he muttered. That small concession was all Daisy needed. She asked about herbs and supplies, and to her surprise, Hank had a well-stocked cabinet of medicinal plants. "Living alone means doctoring yourself," he explained as he directed her to the jars of dried yarrow, comfrey, and willow bark. Working efficiently, Daisy prepared a poultice while heating water for a willow bark tea to help with the pain. She tried not to notice the way Hank's eyes followed her movements, or how the firelight caught the silver strands in his otherwise dark hair. When it came time to apply the poultice, Hank hesitated. "You'll need to see it," he said, his discomfort evident. "I've seen wounded limbs before," she assured him gently. "My father's practice exposed me to far worse, I imagine." With reluctant hands, Hank rolled up his pant leg, revealing a puckered scar that ran from his knee halfway up his thigh. The skin around it was red and swollen, angry from the changing weather. Daisy worked in silence, her touch clinical yet gentle as she applied the warm poultice. She felt Hank's muscles tense beneath her fingers, then gradually relax as the herbs began to work. "How old were you?" he asked suddenly. "During the war, 8 when it began," Daisy replied, securing the poultice with a clean strip of cloth. "Young enough to be frightened, old enough to remember," Hank nodded. "I was 22 at Gettysburg, feels like another life." He paused, taking a sip of the tea she'd prepared. "What brought you west?" Truth this time. Daisy's hands stilled. She looked up to find Hank's gray eyes studying her with unexpected perception. "My fiancé," she said after a moment, her voice barely audible over the storm. "He died of typhoid fever last winter. There was nothing left for me in Ohio after that. Too many memories." Understanding passed between them, a recognition of shared loss though different in nature. "I'm sorry," Hank said simply. "As am I for your leg," she replied. The rain continued through the night, and Hank insisted Daisy take his bed while he slept on a bedroll near the fire. Despite her protests, he was adamant, and Daisy was too exhausted to argue further. She fell asleep to the sound of rain on the roof and the occasional crackle of the fire, feeling strangely safe in this stranger's home. Morning brought no respite from the storm. If anything, it had intensified overnight, the wind howling with renewed fury. Daisy awoke to find Hank already up, moving about the cabin with careful steps, though she noticed he wasn't leaning on his cane quite as heavily. The poultice helped. he acknowledged when she inquired after his leg. "Though I suspect we're in for more weather before it gets better." He nodded toward the window, where sheets of rain lashed against the glass. "You'll be staying at least another day, Miss Newcomb." "Daisy, please," she insisted, helping him prepare a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush with dried berries. "And I'm grateful for your hospitality." As the day wore on, confined by the relentless storm, Daisy learned that Hank Ingram was a man of few words but considerable depths. He had come west after the war, unable to return to his family's farm in Pennsylvania with his injury. He tried his hand at various trades before settling on this plot of land 3 years ago, where he raised horses and did some trapping in the winter months. "Not the life I imagined," he admitted as they sat by the fire that evening, "but it suits me. Most days, anyway. It's very solitary," Daisy observed, her fingers busy mending a tear in one of his shirts she'd found in need of attention. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "That's partly the point. You don't miss having company?" she asked, genuinely curious. Hank considered her question, firelight playing across his features. "Sometimes," he finally admitted, "but people look at you differently when you come back from war broken, especially when they can see it plain as day every time you take a step." His gaze dropped to his leg. "Easier to be alone than to be the object of pity." "I don't pity you," Daisy said firmly. "I admire your resilience." His eyes met hers, surprise evident in their gray depths. For a moment, something passed between them, a current of understanding that made Daisy's cheeks warm. She looked away first, focusing intently on her stitches. The storm continued for 3 more days, keeping them confined to the cabin. Each day brought them into closer confidence. Daisy continued to treat Hank's leg, pleased to see the inflammation gradually subsiding. In return, Hank taught her practical skills she would need in the West: how to identify approaching weather, which plants were safe to eat, how to build a fire that would last through the night. On the evening of the 4th day, as they sat at Hank's small table sharing a meal of venison and wild greens, Daisy noticed him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "What is it?" she asked, setting down her fork. "Been thinking," he said slowly. "Trail to Silver City passes through Miller's Gorge. After a storm like this, that crossing will be dangerous for weeks. Water runs high there even in good weather." Concern flickered through Daisy. "But surely there must be another way. I'm expected in Silver City." "They'll think I've abandoned my position." "There's another route," Hank acknowledged, "but it adds 3 days to the journey and parts of it aren't safe for a woman traveling alone." He hesitated, then added, "I could take you, once my leg is up to the ride." Daisy felt a flutter of something unexpected in her chest. "You would do that? You barely know me." "Know you well enough," he replied, his voice gruff but gentle. "Besides, I need supplies from town anyway." That night, as Daisy lay in Hank's bed listening to the rain finally beginning to slacken, she found herself contemplating her host with growing confusion. He was nothing like Thomas, her deceased fiancé who had been educated, refined, and unfailingly proper. Hank was rough-hewn, taciturn, shaped by hardship and solitude. Yet there was a steadiness to him, an honesty that she found increasingly compelling. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed. Streams had become rivers, and the path leading from Hank's cabin was a muddy morass. Hank surveyed the damage with a practiced eye. "We'll wait another 2 days," he decided. "Let things dry out a bit, use the time to get ready for the journey." Those 2 days passed in a flurry of preparations. Daisy insisted on continuing to treat Hank's leg, and to her satisfaction, his limp was noticeably less pronounced. She caught him watching her often, his expression thoughtful, though he would quickly look away when she noticed. For his part, Hank found himself increasingly discomfited by his guest's presence. Daisy Newcomb represented everything he had left behind: civilization, gentility, the promise of a normal life. Her hands, though capable, were still soft compared to the calloused palms of frontier women. Her speech carried the refinement of her Eastern upbringing. Yet she adapted to his rustic lifestyle with grace, never complaining about the hardships or discomforts. More unsettling than her adaptability was how quickly he had grown accustomed to her presence. The cabin, which had never seemed empty to him before, would feel cavernous when she departed. This realization troubled him deeply. On the morning they were to leave for Silver City, Hank rose before dawn. His leg ached dully, but the sharp pain that had plagued him during the storm had subsided significantly. He moved about the cabin quietly, packing supplies and checking his firearms. The journey would take 4 days if all went well, 4 more days in Daisy's company before she began her new life, and he returned to his solitude. Daisy emerged from the bedroom dressed in her traveling clothes, her hair neatly braided and pinned. She had mended her storm-damaged dress as best she could, though it still bore the marks of her ordeal. "I've made breakfast," Hank said, nodding toward the table where he'd laid out a meal of johnnycakes and the last of his preserved fruit. "Thank you." Her smile was warm, genuine. "For everything, Hank, your kindness has been unexpected," he shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said firmly, "not anyone. Many would have turned me away or worse." She placed her hand lightly on his arm. "I won't forget what you've done for me." Hank felt the warmth of her touch through his sleeve, and for a moment he allowed himself to imagine what it might be like if she weren't leaving, if she might stay, bringing light and conversation to his solitary existence. The thought was as painful as it was tempting. They set out as the sun crested the eastern hills, Hank on his sturdy gelding and Daisy on her recovered mare. The landscape was still sodden, streams swollen with rainwater, but the sky above was a clear, piercing blue that seemed to go on forever. "Beautiful country," Daisy remarked as they rode side by side along a ridge that offered views of the distant mountains. "I can see why you chose it," Hank nodded. "Changes every season, never the same view twice." He pointed toward a stand of aspen trees in the distance. "Those turn gold in autumn, like they're made of sunshine." "I hope to see that," Daisy said softly, then added, "From Silver City, I mean." The first day's journey was uneventful, though slower than Hank would have liked due to the muddy conditions. They made camp in a sheltered grove as the sun began to set, and Hank efficiently set about building a small fire while Daisy arranged their bedrolls. As they sat eating a simple supper of jerky and hardtack, Daisy broke the comfortable silence. "Will you tell me about it? The war, I mean." "Only if you wish to." Hank stared into the flames for a long moment. No one had asked him directly about his experiences in years. Most people either assumed they knew or preferred not to know. "What do you want to know?" he asked finally. "Whatever you're willing to share," she replied, her voice gentle but not pitying. "My father treated soldiers, but he rarely spoke of what he saw. I think it was too painful for him." Hank took a deep breath. "It was hell on earth, Gettysburg especially. Men falling all around you, the noise so loud you couldn't hear yourself think, smoke so thick you could barely see." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "I wasn't afraid of dying, strangely enough, was more afraid of letting down the men beside me." "Is that when you were wounded?" Daisy asked softly. Hank nodded. "Third day of fighting. We were holding a position near Little Round Top when I took a mini-A ball to the leg, felt like being kicked by a mule, then nothing but fire." His voice grew distant. "Lay there for hours before the medics got to me. Doctor wanted to take the leg, but a surgeon named Harrison thought he could save it. Did more or less." "I'm glad he did," Daisy said. Hank looked up, meeting her eyes across the fire. "Am I? Sometimes I wonder if I wouldn't have been better off with a wooden leg, less pain at least." "But it's a part of you," she insisted. "And it's healing even now. I've seen the improvement these past days." "Because of you," he acknowledged. Daisy smiled, the firelight casting a golden glow on her features. "Because you allowed me to help. There's strength in that too, you know." In accepting help when it's offered. Hank considered her words, finding unexpected wisdom in them. In the years since his injury, he had prided himself on needing no one, viewing his independence as proof that he wasn't broken. Yet in just a few days, this young woman had challenged that notion, showing him that allowing someone else to ease his burden didn't diminish his strength. That night, as he lay in his bedroll listening to Daisy's soft breathing nearby, Hank confronted an uncomfortable truth. He was developing feelings for her. Feelings that had no place in his solitary existence, feelings that could only lead to disappointment. In 3 more days, she would begin her new life in Silver City, and he would return to his cabin alone. Better to guard his heart now than to nurse a greater wound later. The second day of their journey brought them through increasingly rugged terrain. Hank chose their path carefully, avoiding the worst of the flood-damaged areas. By midday, they had reached a high meadow dotted with wildflowers, a perfect spot to rest the horses. As they ate a cold lunch, Daisy asked, "Have you always been alone, Hank? Since the war, I mean." The question caught him off guard. Mostly. Tried working cattle drives for a while, but the leg made it difficult. Did some scouting for the army, then odd jobs in various towns. He shrugged. Easier on my own, no one to answer to, no one to disappoint. That sounds lonely, she observed. Solitary, he corrected. There's a difference. Daisy considered this. I suppose there is. Still, humans aren't meant to live entirely alone, we need connection. Like your connection in Ohio? Hank asked, immediately regretting the question when he saw pain flash across her face. Thomas was a good man, she said after a moment. We grew up together, everyone expected us to marry. When he died, I felt not only grief but a strange sense of displacement, as if I'd lost not just him but my place in the world. She looked up, her eyes meeting Hank's. Is that how you felt? After your injury, the insight in her question struck him to his core. Yes, he admitted quietly. Exactly like that. They fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts as they continued their journey. The terrain grew more challenging as they descended into a narrow valley, forcing them to ride single file. Hank led the way, constantly vigilant for hazards, acutely aware of his responsibility for Daisy's safety. As dusk approached, they made camp near a clear stream. While Daisy gathered wood for a fire, Hank set about checking the horses. He was adjusting his gelding saddle when a sharp pain lanced through his bad leg, causing him to stumble and fall heavily against the horse's flank. The startled animal sidestepped, inadvertently stepping on Hank's foot. He let out a curse, more from surprise than pain. Daisy was at his side in an instant, her arms supporting him. Are you all right? The concern in her voice made his chest tighten. Fine, he said gruffly, trying to pull away, but his leg buckled beneath him. You're not fine, she insisted, helping him to a fallen log. Let me see. Too exhausted to argue, Hank allowed her to examine his leg. The old wound was inflamed again, the day's riding having taken its toll. You should have told me you were in pain, Daisy chided gently, reaching for her bag where she kept the medicinal herbs she had brought from his cabin. We could have rested more frequently, and take even longer to reach Silver City. Hank shook his head. You're already delayed because of the storm. My position can wait another day if needed, she said firmly. Your health is more important. As she prepared another poultice, working with confident, practiced movements, Hank found himself watching her with growing admiration. She was stronger than she appeared, this Eastern woman with her soft hands and gentle voice. There was steel beneath her femininity, a resilience born perhaps of her own losses. That night, after they had eaten and Daisy had treated his leg, they sat by the fire longer than usual. The night was clear, the stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust. Neither seemed eager to retire to their bedrolls to end this moment of companionship. Do you ever regret coming west? Daisy asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Hank considered the question. Sometimes, he admitted. When the winters are harsh or when the leg pains me badly. But then spring comes and I watch the land come alive again and I remember why I'm here. He looked at her across the fire. What about you, having second thoughts about Silver City? Daisy drew her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. Not second thoughts exactly, but I'm nervous. I've never taught before, not formally. What if I fail these children who need proper education? You won't fail, Hank said with certainty. You've got too much sense and too much heart. She smiled at him, a genuine smile that reached her eyes and made them crinkle at the corners. Thank you for your confidence. It means more than you know. Later, as Daisy slept soundly nearby, Hank remained awake, staring at the stars through the gaps in the tree canopy. He was developing feelings for this woman, feelings he had no right to nurture. She was educated, refined, destined for a life among people. His place was in the wilderness, alone with his memories and his pain. Better for both of them if he maintained his distance for the remainder of their journey. The third day dawned crisp and clear. Hank's leg felt better after Daisy's treatment, though he knew it would trouble him again by day's end. They broke camp efficiently, now comfortable with each other's rhythms and routines. As they rode, Hank pointed out landmarks and wildlife, sharing his knowledge of the territory. Daisy listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that revealed her quick intelligence. There, Hank said around midday, pointing to a distant plume of smoke rising against the blue sky. That's Cooperville, small settlement, but they've got a general store. We'll stop there for the night, get fresh supplies. Actual beds, Daisy asked with a teasing smile. If the boarding house has rooms available, Hank replied, returning her smile despite himself. Might even stretch to a hot bath if you've a mind for one. That sounds like heaven, she admitted. Cooperville proved to be little more than a cluster of buildings along a rutted main street, a general store, a saloon, a small church, and the boarding house Hank had mentioned. Still, after days in the wilderness, it seemed a welcome touch of civilization to Daisy. The proprietor of the boarding house, a stout woman named Mrs. Wilkins, eyed them suspiciously until Hank explained their situation. Miss Newcomb is the new schoolteacher for Silver City, he said. I'm escorting her there after the storm delayed her journey. We'll need 2 rooms for the night. Only got 1 room available, Mrs. Wilkins replied, her expression softening slightly at the mention of Daisy's profession. Mining company men took the rest. Hank hesitated, looking at Daisy. I can sleep in the stable. Nonsense, Mrs. Wilkins interrupted. Room's got 2 beds. Perfectly proper, especially for folks just passing through. She gave Daisy an appraising look. Bath water's extra, but worth every penny after being on the trail. Thank you, Daisy said gratefully. We'll take it. The room was small but clean, with 2 narrow beds separated by a simple screen. Daisy disappeared behind it to change while Hank awkwardly settled himself on the edge of his assigned bed, feeling strangely domestic in this shared space. After Daisy had enjoyed her bath, returning with damp hair and pink cheeks that made Hank's heart beat a little faster, they went to the general store to replenish their supplies. Hank noticed how Daisy lingered over a display of ribbons, her fingers lightly touching a blue one that matched her eyes. Without comment, he added it to their purchases when she moved on to examine other goods. When the shopkeeper wrapped it up with their other supplies and Daisy looked at him questioningly, Hank merely shrugged. Thought you might like it. The simple gift seemed to please her enormously. Thank you, she said softly. It's been a long time since anyone gave me a present. They ate dinner at the boarding house, a hearty stew with fresh bread that tasted like luxury after days of trail food. As they ate, Daisy spoke more openly about her hopes for her new position, her desire to make a difference in the lives of the children she would teach. Silver City's growing, she explained. The silver mines have brought prosperity, but also families who want better for their children than they had. I want to help provide that. You'll do well there, Hank said, meaning it. Town's rough around the edges, but there are good people. Will you visit? Daisy asked suddenly. When you come to town for supplies, I mean. The question caught him off guard. Would you want me to? Of course, she replied without hesitation. I'd like to think we've become friends. The word both pleased and pained him. Then yes, I'll visit when I can. That night, separated by nothing but a flimsy screen, Hank lay awake listening to Daisy's soft breathing. Tomorrow they would reach Silver City, and this unexpected interlude in his solitary existence would end. He told himself it was for the best, that he wasn't suited for companionship, let alone anything deeper. Yet as sleep finally claimed him, his dreams were filled with auburn hair and a smile that reached clever blue eyes. Morning arrived with a bustle of activity as the mining company men prepared to depart. Hank and Daisy ate a quick breakfast before retrieving their horses from the stable. The final leg of their journey would take them through rolling hills and eventually into the valley, where Silver City had sprung up around the lucrative silver deposits discovered there a decade earlier. They rode mostly in silence, both perhaps feeling the weight of their impending separation. As they crested a hill around midday, Silver City came into view below them, a sprawling settlement much larger than Cooperville, with proper streets and substantial buildings interspersed with the tents and shacks of newer arrivals. "It's bigger than I expected," Daisy remarked, reining in her horse beside Hank's. "Grown fast," Hank agreed. "Silver brings people money too." They descended toward the town, and Hank couldn't help but notice how Daisy straightened in her saddle, composing herself for her arrival. She had pinned the blue ribbon into her hair, a small touch of adornment that somehow emphasized her natural beauty. The main street of Silver City was bustling with activity wagons loaded with ore, miners coming off shift, women going about their shopping, children darting between buildings in games of chase. Several people nodded to Hank in recognition as they passed, curious eyes taking in his companion. "Town council office is there," Hank said, pointing to a brick building with an American flag hanging limply in the still air. "They'll be expecting you." Daisy nodded, suddenly looking nervous. "Yes, I should report to them immediately." She hesitated, then added, "Would you come with me, just to make the introductions?" Hank hadn't planned on lingering in town, but he found himself nodding. Of course. The council chairman, a portly man named George Haverford, was clearly relieved to see Daisy. "Miss Newcomb, we feared something had befallen you when you didn't arrive on schedule." "I apologize for the delay, Mr. Haverford," Daisy replied. "The storm made travel impossible. If not for Mr. Ingram's kindness in offering shelter and then escorting me here, I might not have made it at all." Haverford turned to Hank with newfound respect. "We're in your debt, Ingram." Miss Newcomb's arrival has been eagerly anticipated. The schoolhouse has stood empty too long. Hank shifted uncomfortably under the man's gratitude. "Just doing what anyone would." "Nonsense," Haverford insisted. "You must allow the town to show its appreciation. There's to be a social this Saturday at the church. You'll attend as our guest of honor." Before Hank could formulate a polite refusal, Daisy spoke up. "Oh, that would be wonderful, don't you think, Hank? A chance to meet everyone under pleasant circumstances." Trapped by her obvious enthusiasm, Hank found himself agreeing. "Suppose I could make it back to town by Saturday." "Excellent," Haverford beamed. "Now, Miss Newcomb, let me show you to your accommodations. Mrs. Peterson has prepared the teachers' quarters behind the schoolhouse. They're modest but comfortable." As Haverford led them out, Daisy glanced back at Hank, a mixture of excitement and apprehension in her expression. He gave her what he hoped was an encouraging nod. The teachers' quarters proved to be a small but neat cabin attached to the rear of the schoolhouse. It contained a bedroom, a sitting area with a small stove, and basic furnishings. Mrs. Peterson, the council secretary's wife, had indeed prepared it well, with fresh linens on the bed and a vase of wildflowers on the small table. "It's perfect," Daisy declared, turning in a small circle to take it all in. "Just perfect. School term starts Monday," Haverford explained. "We've about 30 children of varying ages. The previous teacher left some materials, though I'm afraid they're somewhat outdated." "I've brought some books of my own," Daisy assured him. "And I'm eager to assess the children's current knowledge." As Haverford continued outlining her duties, Hank found himself fading into the background, suddenly acutely aware that his role in Daisy's life was coming to its natural conclusion. She belonged here among people doing work that mattered. He belonged back in his cabin with his solitude and his memories. When Haverford finally departed, leaving them alone in the small cabin, an awkward silence fell between them. "Well," Hank said at last, "seems you're well settled." "I should be getting back before dark." "Oh," disappointment flashed across Daisy's face. "I thought perhaps you might stay in town tonight. The hotel better to make some distance while there's daylight," he interrupted, not meeting her eyes. "Besides, I've imposed on your time enough." "Imposed?" Daisy stepped closer, her brow furrowed. "Hank, you saved my life. You've been nothing but kind and generous." He shrugged, uncomfortable with her praise. "Just did what needed doing." "Will I see you Saturday for the social?" Her voice held a note of vulnerability that made his chest tighten. "I'll try," he said, knowing even as he spoke that he should make an excuse, create distance now before it became harder for both of them. But he couldn't bring himself to disappoint her. "Might be a bit late." Daisy's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I'll look for you." The moment stretched between them, laden with things unsaid. Hank knew he should leave, should tip his hat and walk away, back to the life he'd built for himself. Instead, he found himself saying, "You'll do well here, Daisy. These children are lucky to have you." "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything, Hank. I don't know how I can ever repay your kindness." "No need," he replied, finally forcing himself to turn toward the door. "Good luck with your teaching." As he mounted his horse and rode out of Silver City, Hank felt a hollowness in his chest that had nothing to do with hunger or fatigue. He told himself it was for the best, that a woman like Daisy Newcomb deserved better than a broken-down cowboy with a permanent limp and a cabin in the wilderness. She deserved the life that awaited her here: respect, purpose, community. Yet as the miles stretched between them, he couldn't help but remember the way she had looked at him over the campfire, the gentleness of her hands as she tended his wound, the sound of her laughter when he'd told a rare joke. For the first time since returning from the war, Hank Ingram found himself longing for something beyond solitude. The journey back to his cabin seemed longer and lonelier than any he could remember. The landscape that had always brought him peace now seemed empty, the silence oppressive rather than comforting. When he finally arrived home, the cabin felt smaller, darker, and uninviting. For 3 days, Hank tried to resume his normal routine, tending his horses, checking his trap lines, repairing fence posts damaged by the storm. But his thoughts continually drifted to Silver City, to Daisy settling into her new life without him. Several times, he found himself reaching for his cane before remembering that his leg was causing him less pain than usual, thanks to Daisy's treatments and the exercises she had taught him. By Saturday morning, Hank had convinced himself not to attend the social. It would be better for Daisy to establish herself in the community without the complication of her association with him. Better for him to accept now that their paths had diverged. Yet as evening approached, he found himself standing before the small mirror in his cabin, trimming his beard and slicking back his hair with water. Before he could talk himself out of it, he was saddling his gelding and riding toward Silver City, dressed in the cleanest shirt he owned, and the vest he wore only for special occasions. The church was lit up with lanterns when he arrived, music and laughter spilling out into the darkening evening. Hank tethered his horse and stood for a moment, gathering his courage. He hadn't attended a social gathering since before the war. The prospect was almost more terrifying than facing Confederate artillery. As he approached the door, he heard a familiar voice call his name. Daisy was standing just outside, her face lighting up at the sight of him. She wore a simple blue dress that matched the ribbon in her hair, and Hank thought she had never looked more beautiful. "You came," she said, sounding genuinely pleased. "I was beginning to worry you'd changed your mind." "Said I would," Hank replied, suddenly acutely aware of his rough appearance compared to the townspeople in their Sunday best. "Though I'm not much for socializing." "Nonsense," Daisy said firmly, taking his arm as naturally as if she'd done it 100 times before. "Everyone's eager to meet you. You're quite the hero, you know." "I'm no hero," he muttered as she led him inside. The church had been transformed into a festive space with benches pushed back to create room for dancing. A small band played lively tunes in one corner, while tables laden with food and drink lined another wall. Hank felt eyes turning toward them as they entered, and he resisted the urge to turn and flee. True to Haverford's word, Hank found himself treated as a guest of honor. Men clapped him on the back, thanking him for bringing their new teacher safely to town. Women pressed plates of food into his hands and asked after his health. Children stared openly at his limp, though their parents quickly shushed their questions. Through it all, Daisy remained by his side, her hand occasionally coming to rest on his arm when she sensed his discomfort growing too great. She seemed to have already made a place for herself in the community, greeting people by name, asking after family members, clearly having made an effort to know the parents of her future students. "She's something special, that one," remarked an older man who introduced himself as the town's doctor. "Been here less than a week and already has half the town wrapped around her finger." "She has a way about her," Hank agreed, watching as Daisy knelt to speak to a shy young girl clutching her mother's skirts. "You two known each other long?" the doctor asked, his shrewd eyes assessing Hank. "Just since the storm," Hank replied. "Happened upon my cabin seeking shelter." "Providence, some might call it," the doctor observed. "Way she tells it, you saved her life and then nursed that leg of yours with some skill. Military wound, is it?" Hank nodded, surprised that Daisy had spoken of him. "Gettysburg." The doctor nodded sagely, thought as much. "Seen my share of war injuries. That one giving you much trouble still?" "Less than usual lately," Hank admitted. "Miss Newcomb has a healer's touch." "So I've heard," the doctor said with a knowing smile. "Seems to me there might be more than one kind of healing happening here." Before Hank could formulate a response to this cryptic remark, Daisy returned to his side, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Hank, they're about to start the dancing," she said. "Would you?" She hesitated, perhaps suddenly remembering his disability. "My leg's not up to dancing," Hank said quickly, sparing her the awkwardness of retracting her invitation. "But don't let that stop you. I'm sure there are plenty of fellows who'd be honored." Indeed, no sooner had he spoken than a young man approached, asking Daisy for the honor of the first dance. With an apologetic glance at Hank, she accepted, allowing herself to be led to the center of the room where couples were forming lines for a Virginia reel. Hank watched from the sidelines as Daisy moved through the figures of the dance, her face alight with joy, her movements graceful despite the energetic nature of the reel. She was quickly claimed for the next dance and the next, clearly a popular partner among the town's bachelors. A familiar heaviness settled in Hank's chest as he observed her integration into Silver City society. This was where she belonged among people who appreciated her brightness, her warmth, her intelligence. Not in a remote cabin with a damaged man who'd forgotten how to be part of a community. As the evening wore on, Hank found himself drifting toward the door, his social reserves depleted. He had done his duty, attended the social, accepted the town's gratitude, ensured that Daisy was well received. Now he could return to his solitude with a clear conscience, knowing she was where she was meant to be. He had just reached the church steps when he heard her voice behind him. "You're leaving?" Without saying goodbye. Hank turned to find Daisy standing in the doorway, her expression a mixture of hurt and confusion. "Didn't want to interrupt your dancing," he said, the excuse sounding weak even to his own ears. "Seemed to be enjoying yourself." "I was," she admitted, stepping out into the cool night air. "But I'd have enjoyed it more if you'd been by my side." She moved closer, close enough that he could smell the lavender scent of her hair. "Hank, what's wrong? You've barely spoken to me all evening." "Nothing's wrong," he insisted. "Just not used to all this socializing. Thought it best to head back." Daisy studied his face in the lantern light, her perceptiveness making him feel exposed. "You're pulling away," she said softly. "Why, have I done something to offend you?" "No," he said quickly. "Nothing like that, it's just—" He struggled to find words that wouldn't reveal too much of his heart. You fit here, Daisy. This is where you belong, with people who can appreciate what you have to offer. And you don't think you're one of those people? She asked, stepping even closer. Hank shook his head, his throat tight. I'm not fit company for someone like you. I'm broken, Daisy, inside and out. No, she said firmly, her hand coming up to rest against his cheek. You're wounded, not broken. There's a difference. Her touch was like a brand against his skin, making it impossible to maintain his resolve. What do you want from me, Daisy? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. I want you not to disappear from my life, she replied simply. I want you to visit when you come to town. I want. She hesitated, then continued with quiet determination. I want a chance to know you better, Hank Ingram. To see if what I've begun to feel for you might grow into something more. Her words struck him like a physical blow. You can't mean that, he said. You've only known me a week. Sometimes a week is enough to recognize something true, she countered. I'm not asking for promises, Hank, just… Possibility. Possibility. The word hung between them, fragile and potent. Hank had long ago stopped believing in possibilities, had resigned himself to limitations and constraints. Yet standing before this remarkable woman who looked at him and saw not what he lacked but what remained, he felt something long dormant stir within him. I can't offer you much, he said finally. My life is simple, hard sometimes. I'm stronger than I look, she reminded him with a small smile. And I'm not asking you to change your life, only to include me in it, in whatever way feels right. The music from inside the church had slowed to a waltz, the gentle melody drifting out into the night. Without fully intending to, Hank found himself holding out his hand to Daisy. Can't dance properly, he said gruffly, but we could try if you wanted. Her smile was like sunrise. I'd like that very much. There on the church steps, under the vast Wyoming sky studded with stars, Hank Ingram danced for the first time since the war. It was a halting, awkward affair, more of a slow shuffle than a proper waltz, but with Daisy in his arms, her head resting trustingly against his shoulder, he felt something akin to grace. When the music ended, they remained standing close, neither willing to break the moment. Finally, Hank spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I should get back, long ride ahead. Daisy nodded, though reluctance was clear in her expression. When will I see you again? The question contained so much hope that Hank couldn't bring himself to equivocate. I need to come to town for supplies next week, Thursday likely. I'll make dinner, she said immediately, at my quarters if you'd like that. I would, he admitted, surprised by how much he meant it. As he prepared to depart, Daisy surprised him by rising on tiptoe and pressing a soft kiss to his cheek. Ride safely, Hank Ingram, and remember what I said about possibilities. The ride back to his cabin that night was filled with turbulent thoughts. Hank had lived so long with certainties, the certainty of his solitude, of his limitations, of a future constrained by his past. Daisy Newcomb had introduced uncertainty into his carefully ordered existence, and he found himself simultaneously terrified and exhilarated by it. True to his word, Hank returned to Silver City the following Thursday. He arrived to find Daisy in the schoolhouse, still teaching despite the late hour. He stood in the doorway, unnoticed, watching as she patiently helped a young boy sound out words in a primer. Her face was animated, her encouragement genuine, and Hank felt a swell of admiration for her dedication. When she finally noticed him, her whole countenance brightened. Class dismissed, she announced to the handful of remaining students. Remember to practice your letters for tomorrow. As the children filed out, several casting curious glances at Hank, Daisy approached him with undisguised pleasure. You're right on time. I was just finishing up with some students who needed extra help. Didn't mean to interrupt, Hank said. You didn't, she assured him. Besides, I've been looking forward to this all week. She led him to her quarters, where she had indeed prepared dinner, a simple but savory stew, fresh bread from the town bakery, and an apple pie that she admitted with a laugh she had purchased rather than baked. Cooking is not among my talents, she confessed as they ate at her small table, though I'm learning. Mrs. Peterson has been giving me lessons. Stew's good, Hank said truthfully. Better than mine, anyway. They talked easily as they ate, Daisy sharing stories of her first week of teaching, Hank offering updates on the repairs he'd made to his cabin after the storm damage. It felt remarkably comfortable, this shared meal, this exchange of daily details that most would consider mundane. After dinner, they sat in her small sitting area, Daisy in the room's only armchair, Hank on a straight-backed chair he'd positioned near the stove for warmth. Outside, the first snow of the season had begun to fall, dusting the town in white. "Will you be able to make it back safely?" Daisy asked, concern evident in her voice as she glanced toward the window. "Should be fine," Hank assured her. "Not a heavy snow yet, I've ridden through worse." "You could stay," she suggested, then quickly added, "at the hotel, I mean, if the snow worsens." Hank nodded, though he knew he would make the journey regardless of the weather. There was something dangerous in prolonging his time with Daisy, something that made him both yearn for more and fear it simultaneously. As the evening progressed, their conversation deepened. Daisy spoke of her parents, her father, the doctor who had taught her healing, her mother who had instilled in her a love of learning. Hank, in turn, shared more than he had with anyone in years, memories of his childhood on the Pennsylvania farm, his dreams before the war of perhaps becoming a horse trainer, the long, painful recovery after his injury. "You ever think of going back?" Daisy asked. "To Pennsylvania, I mean." Hank shook his head. "Nothing there for me now. Parents passed during the war, brother moved west to California, farm was sold to pay debts." He stared into the flames visible through the stove's grate. "Besides, out here, nobody looks at me like I'm something to be pitied." "Is that how you felt?" "Back east, some," he admitted. "Others looked at me like I'd failed somehow, couldn't understand why I didn't just get over it, move on." He glanced up at her. "Out here, a man's judged more by what he can do than what he can't. Long as I can sit a horse, tend my land, I'm respected well enough." "You're respected here too," Daisy said. "You should hear how people speak of you. That Ingram fellow, they say, he's a good man to have nearby. Knows the land better than anyone." Her words warmed him more than he wanted to admit. "They're just grateful I brought you to them." "Town needed a teacher badly." "It's more than that," she insisted. "They see your worth, Hank, as I do." The earnestness in her voice made him uncomfortable, unaccustomed as he was to such direct praise. He rose, moving to the window to observe the snow now falling more heavily. "Should probably head out before this gets worse." Disappointment flickered across Daisy's face, but she nodded in understanding. "When will you come to town again?" "Not sure," he said honestly. "Winter makes travel difficult, might be a few weeks." "I understand." She hesitated, then added, "I could visit you, perhaps, when school breaks for Christmas. If that wouldn't be an imposition." The thought of Daisy in his cabin again, bringing light and conversation to his solitude, was both tempting and terrifying. "Roads might be impassable by then," he hedged. "I'm becoming quite an accomplished rider," she said with a small smile. "And I've been told I'm stubborn when I set my mind to something." Despite himself, Hank found himself returning her smile, "that I can believe." After a moment's consideration, he added, "If you want to come and if the weather allows, you'd be welcome." Her expression brightened, and Hank felt a corresponding lightness in his chest. It was dangerous, this feeling. Dangerous and addictive. As he prepared to leave, Daisy surprised him again, this time with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "For your leg," she explained as he unwrapped it to find jars of the herbal preparations she had made at his cabin. "The willow bark tea helps with inflammation, and the salve is for the scar tissue, to keep it supple." The thoughtfulness of the gift left him momentarily speechless. "Thank you," he managed finally. "Wasn't expecting, I know," she interrupted gently. "That's what makes it a gift, Hank." Outside, in the swirling snow, she stood on tiptoe once more to kiss his cheek, her lips warm against his cold skin. "Be safe," she whispered. "And remember you're always welcome here." The winter that followed was one of the harshest in Wyoming's memory. Heavy snows and biting winds made travel between Hank's homestead and Silver City difficult and often dangerous. Yet Hank found himself making the journey more frequently than was strictly necessary, drawn to the warmth of Daisy's company despite the physical discomfort of the ride. For her part, Daisy seemed genuinely delighted each time he appeared. She would welcome him to her quarters for meals, or they would walk together through the town, Daisy greeted warmly by her students and their parents, Hank gradually becoming a familiar sight at her side. As Christmas approached, the weather worsened, making Hank doubt the wisdom of Daisy attempting the journey to his cabin. When he expressed his concerns during a mid-December visit, she listened thoughtfully. "Perhaps you're right," she conceded. "It would be irresponsible to risk it in such conditions." Her expression brightened. "But that doesn't mean we can't celebrate together. The town is holding a Christmas gathering at the church. Would you consider staying for it? The hotel always keeps rooms available for travelers stranded by weather." The prospect of spending Christmas in town, surrounded by people, was daunting. Yet the alternative, spending it alone in his cabin while knowing Daisy was celebrating without him, was somehow worse. "I'll come," he promised, and was rewarded with a smile that made the decision worthwhile. The Christmas gathering proved less uncomfortable than Hank had feared. The townspeople had grown accustomed to his presence over the preceding months, and if some still eyed his limp with curiosity or pity, most greeted him with genuine warmth. Several of the men engaged him in conversation about the unusual winter weather and its effects on game movements, respecting his knowledge of the land. Daisy, dressed in a deep green dress that enhanced the auburn highlights in her hair, moved through the gathering with natural grace, clearly at home among these people who had become her community. Yet Hank noticed that her eyes frequently sought him out across the room, as if ensuring he wasn't feeling abandoned. As the evening progressed, Daisy found herself momentarily alone with Hank near the church's modest Christmas tree, decorated with paper chains and candles. "Are you enjoying yourself?" she asked, her expression hopeful. "More than I expected to," he admitted. "Your students seem fond of you." "I'm fond of them too," she said with a smile. "Teaching them has been even more rewarding than I'd hoped." She hesitated, then added, "But I've missed our conversations at your cabin, the quiet evenings by the fire." "You have?" Hank was genuinely surprised. "Thought you'd be too busy with your new life here to think much about that." "I think about it often," she said softly. "About you often." The admission hung between them, charged with significance. Before Hank could formulate a response, Mrs. Peterson approached, drawing Daisy away to help serve the Christmas pudding. The moment passed, but Hank carried her words with him like a talisman. Later that night, as he lay in the unfamiliar bed at the Silver City Hotel, Hank allowed himself to consider possibilities he had long denied. Perhaps Daisy's feelings for him were more than gratitude or pity. Perhaps, despite his damaged body and solitary nature, he might still have something to offer a woman like her. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. The winter months passed in a similar pattern, periods of isolation at his cabin, punctuated by increasingly frequent visits to Silver City. With each visit, Hank found himself more comfortable in Daisy's presence, more willing to share his thoughts and memories, more receptive to her gentle touches and warm smiles. By late March, when the first signs of spring began to soften the Wyoming landscape, something had shifted between them. There was an ease in their interactions, a natural rhythm to their conversations, a growing physical awareness that manifested in lingering glances and accidental brushes of hands. It was during an early April visit, as they walked together along Silver Creek, the water swollen with snowmelt, that Daisy broached a subject Hank had carefully avoided. "School term ends in June," she said, picking her way carefully along the muddy bank. "I've been offered a renewal of my contract for the next year." "That's good," Hank said, though he felt a strange tightness in his chest. "Town's lucky to have you." I haven't accepted yet, she continued, her gaze fixed on the rushing water. I wanted to discuss it with you first. Hank stopped walking, surprised by her words. With me? Why? Daisy turned to face him, her expression resolute despite the hint of vulnerability in her eyes. Because what happens between us affects my decision, Hank. Between us, he repeated, his heart hammering in his chest. Yes, between us, she said firmly. I care for you, Hank, more than I thought possible after Thomas. These past months getting to know you, seeing who you truly are beneath your solitude, it's changed me. Changed what I want for my future. Hank swallowed hard, overwhelmed by her directness. Daisy, I'm not, if you're about to say you're not worthy or not whole or not what I need, please don't, she interrupted, stepping closer to him. I know my own mind and heart, Hank Ingram. I'm not a foolish girl with romantic notions. I'm a woman who has seen enough of life to recognize something rare and valuable when I find it. Her words left him speechless, stripped of the defenses he had carefully constructed over years of solitude. Standing before him was a woman offering not pity or momentary comfort, but a genuine desire for partnership, for a shared future. I don't know how to be what you deserve, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. My life is simple, hard sometimes. I don't have much to offer beyond my land and my hands. Your land, your hands, and your heart, Daisy corrected gently. That's all I'm asking for, Hank. A chance to build something together, whether that's here in Silver City or at your homestead or somewhere else entirely. I just know I don't want to continue as we are, with these visits that are never quite enough, these goodbyes that grow harder each time. Hank really looked at her standing before him with courage and honesty written across her features. He thought of his cabin, how empty it felt when he returned after seeing her. He thought of the long winter nights when he had found himself talking aloud, imagining her responses, missing her laugh. Slowly, deliberately, he reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. I care for you too, Daisy, more than I've cared for anyone since before the war, but I'm afraid of failing you, of not being enough. The only failure would be in not trying, she said, squeezing his hand. I'm not asking for certainty, Hank, just courage. The same courage that brought you through the war, that helped you build a life here on your own. The courage to try. In that moment, with the creek rushing beside them and the spring sun warming their faces, Hank Ingram made a choice. He leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and kissed Daisy Newcomb for the first time. It was a gentle kiss, tentative at first, then deepening as she responded with unmistakable passion. When they finally parted, both breathless, Hank rested his forehead against hers. I don't know exactly what happens next, he admitted. But I know I want you in my life, Daisy, however that looks. Her smile was radiant. Then we'll figure it out together, she promised, day by day. As they walked back toward town, hand in hand, Hank felt lighter than he had in years. The future stretched before them. Uncertain but full of possibility, a concept he had almost forgotten how to believe in until Daisy showed him the way. Over the following weeks, they began the careful work of imagining a shared life. Daisy accepted the renewal of her teaching contract, committing to another year in Silver City. Hank, meanwhile, began to consider how his solitary existence might accommodate partnership. The solution, when it emerged, was both practical and symbolic. A parcel of land came available halfway between Silver City and Hank's current homestead, fertile ground with good water access and room for both horses, and a small garden. Close enough to town for Daisy to continue teaching, yet far enough out to satisfy Hank's preference for space and quiet. We could build there, Hank suggested during one of their Sunday afternoon walks. Something bigger than my cabin, but still simple, room enough for both of us to have what we need. The joy in Daisy's expression told him he had found the right compromise. That sounds perfect, she said. A fresh start for both of us. As spring bloomed into summer, their plans took more concrete shape. Hank purchased the land and, with the help of several men from Silver City who had come to respect him, began construction on a house that would become their home. Daisy finished her first year of teaching to accolades from the town council and parents alike, and began preparing for the next term while helping design the interior of their future home. Throughout it all, their relationship deepened and matured. Hank gradually shed some of his reflexive reserve, learning to share not only his thoughts but his feelings. Daisy, in turn, revealed more of her own vulnerabilities, her lingering grief for her parents and Thomas, her fears about being adequate to her teaching duties, her occasional homesickness for the green hills of Ohio. By midsummer, the house was taking shape, and so too was their future together. On a warm August evening, as they sat on the partially completed porch of what would soon be their home, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and crimson, Hank turned to Daisy with newfound certainty. "Marry me," he said simply, no preamble or grand speech, just the direct honesty that had characterized their relationship from the start. Daisy's eyes widened, though her surprise quickly gave way to joy. "Yes," she replied, equally direct, "as soon as the house is finished. I don't want to wait any longer than necessary." Hank felt a smile spread across his face, an expression that had once been rare but had become increasingly common in Daisy's presence. "Nor do I," he agreed, drawing her into his arms. They were married in early October, when the aspen trees had turned the gold that Hank had once told Daisy about, like they're made of sunshine. The ceremony was held in the Silver City Church, attended by the townspeople who had come to regard them both with affection and respect. Daisy wore a simple dress of cream-colored silk, with the blue ribbon Hank had given her securing a spray of wildflowers in her hair. Hank stood tall beside her, his cane set aside for the occasion, his leg bearing his weight with only minimal discomfort thanks to Daisy's continued treatments and his own determined exercises. When he spoke his vows, his voice was clear and strong, carrying to the back of the small church. Their home was completed just days before the wedding, and it was there they began their married life, a sturdy house built with care and foresight, designed to accommodate both Daisy's need for a space to prepare lessons and Hank's preference for a connection to the outdoors. A wide porch wrapped around three sides, offering views of the mountains and the valley. Inside, practical rooms were made warm and inviting by Daisy's touch colorful quilts, shelves of books, simple but attractive furnishings. Hank's horses grazed in a paddock nearby, and by spring, they planned to add a milk cow and chickens. A garden plot had been prepared for Daisy to plant when the weather warmed, and Hank had already constructed a small greenhouse where she could start seedlings. Their first winter as husband and wife tested them, as all Wyoming winters did, with blizzards that isolated them for days, with freezing temperatures that demanded constant vigilance to keep pipes from freezing and livestock from suffering. Yet they faced these challenges together, finding in their partnership a strength neither had possessed alone. On the harshest nights, when the wind howled around the eaves and snow piled against the doors, they would sit before their fire, Daisy often reading aloud from one of her books while Hank worked on small wooden carvings, a skill he had discovered he possessed and enjoyed. Sometimes they would simply talk, sharing thoughts and memories, dreams and fears, building between them an intimacy that transcended the physical. And in the privacy of their bedroom, they discovered each other in ways that healed old wounds and created new bonds. Hank, who had once believed his injury made him less of a man, found in Daisy's loving response to his body an acceptance he had never thought to experience. Daisy, who had feared her heart might never recover from Thomas's death, discovered that love could be reborn, different but no less powerful for having been preceded by loss. Spring brought new beginnings. The garden Daisy planted flourished under her careful attention. The mare Hank had been training delivered a healthy foal that showed promise of becoming an exceptional saddle horse. And most significantly, as the wildflowers began to carpet the hillsides around their home, Daisy shared news that brought Hank to his knees beside her. They were expecting a child of their own, due to arrive with the autumn harvest. "Are you pleased?" Daisy asked, her hands resting protectively over her still flat stomach, her expression a mixture of joy and uncertainty. Hank covered her hands with his own, his voice thick with emotion. "More than I can say," he assured her, "though I'm terrified too. Don't know the first thing about being a father. We'll learn together," she promised, "as we've learned everything else." The months of Daisy's pregnancy passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Hank constructed a cradle from aspen wood, carving intricate patterns along its sides. Daisy sewed tiny garments in the evenings after returning from her teaching duties, which she continued until the beginning of her final month. Their son arrived on a crisp October day, almost exactly a year after their wedding. He had Hank's gray eyes and Daisy's determined chin, and they named him Matthew after Daisy's father. Hank, who had faced Confederate fire without flinching, found himself terrified by the tiny perfection of his son's fingers and toes, the absolute trust in his unfocused gaze. "He's so small," he whispered the first time Daisy placed the swaddled infant in his arms. "How do we protect something so fragile?" "With love," Daisy replied simply, her face glowing with exhaustion and joy. "And by remembering that strength can come from vulnerability, just as it has for us." As their son grew from infant to toddler, their family expanded again, first with a daughter, Emma, born 2 years after Matthew, and then with another son, James, who arrived 2 years after that. Their home, initially designed for a couple, was expanded to accommodate their growing family, with Hank adding rooms as needed, each constructed with the same care and attention to detail as the original structure. Through the years, Daisy continued to teach, though she reduced her schedule as their family grew. Eventually, she began teaching from their home, offering lessons to children from outlying homesteads who couldn't make the daily journey to Silver City. Hank expanded his horse breeding operation, gaining a reputation throughout the territory for animals of exceptional quality and training. Their partnership flourished as they faced the challenges of frontier life together: drought years when crops failed, harsh winters when travel became impossible, illnesses that struck their children and left them anxious and sleepless. Through it all, they maintained the connection that had begun during that long ago storm, a recognition in each other of something essential and irreplaceable. On the 10th anniversary of the day, Daisy had stumbled upon Hank's cabin, seeking shelter from a storm that changed both their lives. They stood together on their porch, watching their children playing in the yard. Matthew, now 9, was showing Emma how to throw a lasso, while 5-year-old James toddled after them, determined to participate despite his older siblings' protests that he was too small. "Did you ever imagine this?" Daisy asked, leaning against Hank's side, his arm wrapped comfortably around her waist. "That night when you opened your door to a half-drowned stranger," Hank shook his head, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Never in my wildest dreams," he admitted. "Thought my life was set in its course, solitary, limited, defined by what I'd lost." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Never imagined I might gain so much more than I'd lost." Daisy turned in his embrace, reaching up to trace the lines that time and weather had etched around his eyes. "Your leg still pains you sometimes," she observed, "especially when storms approach." "The leg, yes," he acknowledged, "but not my heart, not anymore." He covered her hand with his own, holding it against his cheek. "You healed that completely, Daisy Ingram. Storm or sunshine, that healing has endured." As the Wyoming sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and purple, casting long shadows across the land they had tamed together, Hank and Daisy Ingram stood witness to the life they had built, a life neither had imagined possible on that stormy night when fate had brought them together. A life that had begun with shelter offered and wounds tended, and had grown into a love as enduring as the mountains that surrounded them.